On September 9, 1980, Typhoon Orchid was raging over the Pacific Ocean. The wind had reached hurricane strength, and waves were rising as high as a 5-story building. And right through this hell, a ship was making its way. But not just any ship. It was the MV Darbisher, a steel giant as long as 3 football fields. Imagine the Eiffel Tower laid on its side. This colossus was much bigger than the legendary Titanic, a quarter longer, almost twice as wide. Darbisher was the largest British ship of its time, with a mass equal to 4 Titanics. On the bridge stood Captain Geoffrey Underhill, an experienced sailor with 20 years at sea. He had already taken ships through typhoons before and knew his vessel could withstand any blow from nature. After all, the Darbisher had been built only 4 years earlier at the legendary British shipyard that had supplied warships to the Royal Navy for centuries. It was a new generation vessel, the embodiment of all 1970s technology, a double hull, reinforced bulkheads, powerful water pumping systems, practically an unsinkable fortress of steel. The captain reduced speed to a minimum and turned the bow into the waves, standard procedure during a storm. The last message sent over the radio was, "Everything is under control." On board were 44 people, the crew and 2 officers' wives. All were skilled professionals, sailors, engineers, mechanics. In Japan, Captain Underhill's wife was already waiting for him. After 2 months apart, they planned to spend a few days together. The ship had already traveled a long way. It had left a Canadian port with a load of iron ore, crossed the Atlantic, sailed around Africa, and passed through the Indian Ocean. Only the last few miles to the destination remained. Darbisher was a special kind of ship, a universal cargo carrier that could transport almost anything: oil, grain, ore. A revolutionary idea at the time, never sailing empty. Take oil in one direction, load ore for the trip back. Only 6 such ships existed in the whole world, all built in Britain, all considered the peak of engineering skill. By midnight, the ocean had turned into a boiling cauldron. Some waves reached the length of the ship itself, almost 300 meters of moving water. The ship would climb to the crest like a roller coaster, then drop into the deep trough between walls of water. Tons of seawater crashed over the deck, and the wind turned the spray into horizontal rain, striking with the force of machine gun fire. In the engine room, engineers monitored the engines. Everything was going according to plan. The powerful diesel engines hummed steadily, and the pumps kept up with the endless streams of water. In their cabins, part of the crew tried to rest, strapping themselves to their bunks so they wouldn't be thrown out during sudden rolls. Some played cards, others read, trying to ignore the howl of the wind outside. Typhoon Orchid was unpredictable. It had changed course several times. 3 different weather reports gave 3 different forecasts. The captain chose a route that should have taken the ship away from all possible paths of the storm, but the ocean played by its own rules. At 3 in the morning, radio contact with the Darbisher suddenly stopped. No distress signals, no SOS, just silence. The next morning, as the typhoon began to weaken, 2 other ships in the same area safely reached port. Their captains reported they had survived one of the worst storms of their careers. But they made it. The Darbisher did not make contact an hour later, or a day later, or even a week later. At first, the owners, a Liverpool company, didn't panic. In a severe storm, radio antennas often break. But when a week passed and the ship had not appeared in any Japanese port, they finally raised the alarm. Official search efforts began only 6 days after the disappearance. Japanese Navy ships, helicopters, and patrol planes systematically combed every section of the sea. They were looking for anything: wreckage, life rafts, oil slicks, floating debris. But the ocean was completely clean. That went against all the rules. When a ship sinks, any ship, something always floats to the surface. Wooden furniture, plastic canisters, life jackets, documents. Here there was nothing, as if a skyscraper-sized ship had simply vanished into thin air. After 2 weeks, the search was called off. The official conclusion was short: the ship was lost in the storm. No investigation of the causes, no analysis, no questions. For comparison, when the Titanic sank, the investigation lasted for years, studying every detail and questioning hundreds of witnesses. In this case, a ship 4 times bigger was simply written off as another victim of the sea. The only find was an empty lifeboat from the Darbisher, spotted by a Japanese tanker a month and a half later. For the families of the victims, such an investigation felt like a real insult. More than a third of the crew were from Liverpool, the city where the ship's owner was based. These people could not have simply vanished. Among those who refused to accept the official version was Peter Redard. In that disaster, Peter lost his son, a 25-year-old engineer. But Redard Sr. was not just a grieving father. He had worked his whole life as a marine surveyor, inspecting ships' technical conditions. He knew how ships were built, where their weak points were, and what could go wrong. And he knew for certain, ships of the Darbisher class do not just disappear without a trace. Peter began his own investigation. The first thing he discovered was that the Darbisher was one of 6 identical ships, all built at the same shipyard to the same design. They were considered the flagships of the British merchant fleet, the pride of the nation. A year and a half after the Darbisher vanished, another ship from the same series was caught in a storm in the North Sea. While still at sea, cracks appeared in the forward part of its hull. The captain managed to send a distress call, and the crew was evacuated by helicopter. The vessel was barely towed to port in time. That was when Redard dug deeper. He contacted the owners of the remaining 4 ships in the series and discovered a shocking fact. All of them had been found to have cracks in the exact same place, the forward part of the hull. All the ships had been quietly, without publicity, called in for urgent repairs. But why? The answer was found in financial reports. In the 1970s, the shipyard had been going through hard times. Japanese and South Korean shipbuilders were offering the same ships for less money and building them faster. To survive, the British yard started cutting costs, using cheaper steel, simplifying designs, and making significant departures from the original blueprints. Peter sent the dossier he had collected to the Ministry of Transport several times, but no answer ever came. He then went to the press, but the story gained no attention. Redard did not give up and helped to create the Association of Families of Those Lost on the Darbisher. Now it was no longer just a personal tragedy, it was an organized movement for the truth. The turning point came in November 1986. Another ship from the series was sailing from Canada with a cargo of ore. In the North Atlantic, large cracks suddenly began to appear in the forward hull. The ship took shelter in an Irish bay, but 2 days later, a storm tore it from its anchor. Out of control, it struck rocks and literally broke in half. This time, the crew managed to survive. Now the authorities could no longer ignore the problem. An official investigation began. Experts spent 6 months studying documents, blueprints, and interviewing witnesses. Peter Redard handed over all his materials. Families hoped they would finally learn the truth. 9 years after the disaster, the report was published. Families only learned of it from the newspapers. The verdict stated, no structural defects had been found in the bridge-class ships. The Darbisher sank solely because of the forces of nature, possibly after losing control in the storm. This was a slap in the face for everyone who had been waiting for answers. But the families of the dead refused to give up. In the early 1990s, worrying information began to leak into the press. Large cargo ships were disappearing in the ocean with alarming regularity, and almost always with their entire crews. In just 14 years, waves had swallowed about 150 bulk carriers, taking the lives of over 1,000 sailors. Even worse, most of these tragedies had never been officially investigated. Even then, the authorities stubbornly refused to restart the search for the Darbisher. So 14 years after the tragedy, the Families Association, with support from the International Seafarers Union, raised the money for an unprecedented private expedition without any help from the government. Armed with the latest deep-sea sonar, the research vessel headed to the Pacific Ocean, to the point where the Darbisher had sent its last coordinates. Incredibly, the Darbisher was found after just 1 day of searching. It lay at a depth of 4 kilometers, deeper than the height of the tallest mountains in Europe. And it was not a hull torn in half like the Titanic, nor a field of scattered wreckage. Before them rested an almost intact giant steel hull, lying motionless in the eternal cold darkness of the ocean floor. The next 6 years were spent meticulously examining the ship's hull. Deep-sea robots took hundreds of thousands of photographs, from which experts created a highly detailed 3D model of the wreck. It wasn't until the year 2000 that the answer finally surfaced, and the truth about the disaster's cause proved truly shocking. An enormous vessel, the length of 3 football fields, designed to withstand the ocean's fury, was doomed by a single small iron door, no bigger than the one in an average apartment. At the very bow of the ship was an unremarkable storeroom for ropes, paint, and tools. According to the design, it was supposed to be protected by a sealed, reinforced door capable of withstanding the impact of a multi-ton wave. But during construction, they installed an ordinary thin steel door, the same type used in crew cabins. Simple negligence and cost-cutting had cost dozens of lives and sent an ocean giant to the bottom. When the Darbisher met the typhoon, waves began pounding directly into the bow. Scientists later calculated that the ship may have encountered a rogue wave as tall as a 6-story building. One particularly powerful wave simply smashed in the storeroom door. Water poured inside. In minutes, thousands of tons of seawater flooded the small compartment. The bow grew heavier and sank deeper into the water. Now the waves struck not the tall side of the hull, but directly onto the deck. They snapped off ventilation pipes, and water began pouring into the cargo holds. In the engine room, the crew was still trying to understand what was happening. They heard the crashes, felt the ship tilting forward, but didn't know they had less than 2 minutes left. Then came the domino effect. Water in the bow storeroom forced the ship's nose even deeper into the raging sea, as if into sand. Waves rolled across the deck, tearing the covers off the cargo hatches. Steel plates the size of a tennis court. They were built for normal loads, but the typhoon created pressures many times higher. Once water entered the first hold of ore, the ship was doomed. Iron ore mixed with seawater turns into something like liquid concrete, an ultra-heavy mass that drags a vessel down instantly, hold after hold filled with water. In less than 2 minutes, the giant vanished beneath the waves. So fast the radio operator didn't even have time to press the distress button. The loss of the Darbisher and the shocking truth about its cause shook the maritime world. It became clear, if nothing changed, it could happen again at any time, to any ship in any ocean. After the release of the final report in 2000, the shipping industry underwent a genuine revolution. The British government issued 24 recommendations to improve safety, all of them adopted by the international maritime community. Shipbuilders greatly strengthened standards for forward compartments, completely redesigned cargo hatch covers, made water detection sensors in holds mandatory, installed cameras on the bows of all large cargo ships, and required black boxes on all merchant vessels. These changes have saved hundreds of ships and thousands of lives over the past quarter century. Today, cargo ships sink far less often than in the 1980s. In 2018, a bronze memorial engraved with the names of all 44 victims was installed in the garden of a Liverpool church. Divers also fixed a commemorative plaque to the Darbisher's hull on the ocean floor. The MV Darbisher still rests in the Pacific Ocean, 4 kilometers below the surface. In complete darkness, under crushing pressure, the steel giant has become an eternal monument. A monument to human folly and negligence that sank a mighty ship, but also to the persistence and resilience that finally brought the grim truth up from the depths. If it weren't for Peter Redard and the other relatives of the victims, if not for their 14-year fight, the world might never have learned the truth. How many more Darbishers would have gone to sea with the same fatal flaw? No one can say. The story of one ship changed global shipping forever. The price of those changes was 44 lives and 14 years of a father's struggle to make sure the world did not forget.